The first thing I noticed about him was how ordinary he looked. Grey suit, navy tie, white shirt with a collar that had started to curl from too many laundromat presses. He had the kind of face you'd never remember on a train. Pale, mildly tired, hair parted neatly on the left. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but not aggressive, like someone who had read a blog post about the perfect handshake and practiced in the mirror. "Daniel," he asked. "Yes. Hi." "I'm Mark," he said. "Thanks for coming in. Have a seat." The chair opposite him was a standard ergonomic thing with a mesh back, the kind that squeaks when you move. An empty glass of water sat in front of me. His laptop was open but dimmed. On the desk, a printed copy of my resume, stapled neatly in the top corner. None of it felt ominous. If anything, it felt safe, familiar. I sat, smoothed my shirt, tried not to look like I had rehearsed answers in front of my bathroom mirror at 1 a.m. Because I had. Because this job felt like a lifeline after 8 months of rejections so generic they might as well have been auto-generated. Mark smiled. I remember thinking it was a little too symmetrical, like a stock photo of friendly manager. "So," he said, flipping through my resume, "you were at Revell Systems for 3 years." "4, actually," I said. "The last year was contract to hire, but I was doing the same work." He nodded, pen tapping on the paper. "Right, 4. And before that, you did your master's at Purdue." "Yes. Data science, emphasis on probabilistic models." The familiar panic fluttered in my chest. Interview mode. Say the right things, in the right order, in the right tone. Be confident, but not arrogant. Honest, but not self-sabotaging. Human, but only in the most polished sense. "Great," Mark said. He folded his hands. "I like to keep these fairly conversational. We'll cover your background, a bit of technical problem solving, and then I'd like to talk about how you approach ambiguity. Sound good?" "Yeah," I said. "Sure." He smiled again, that symmetrical curvature of lips, and I looked down to adjust my watch band, which had dug into my wrist. I tugged at the leather for maybe 2 seconds, long enough to feel stupidly self-conscious about it. When I looked back up, his hair part was on the right. I didn't register it at first. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a little process fired. Wait, wasn't it on the left? But the thought never reached the level of words. Hair is such a trivial detail. Memory is so unreliable. Interviews are stressful. Mark was still smiling, still flipping through my resume. So I filed it away under, "You're anxious. Ignore it." "Tell me about a time you had to push back on a stakeholder," he said. I launched into the story I always used, about the VP who wanted a dashboard that would cost 2 months of work and deliver almost no actionable insight. I explained how I reframed the problem, negotiated scope, gently guided them to something simpler. As I talked, his expression shifted in the way I'd come to recognize over years of these conversations. Attentive nods, occasional note-taking, the polite little a recruiter makes to show they're listening. I watched his eyes, his eyebrows, his hands. That's what I focused on. His hair, now parted on the right, stayed just at the edge of my awareness, like a picture hung a few degrees crooked that you're trying not to fix it during a dinner party. When he asked the next question, his pen clicked twice in rapid succession. "Interesting," he said. "What would you say is your biggest weakness?" We both chuckled at the cliché. I gave the answer I'd crafted. Difficulty delegating, learning to trust my teammates more, how I'd structured my last project to allow for more shared ownership. somewhere in the middle of that sentence, the air conditioning kicked on with a blast of cold air that hit the back of my neck. I shivered, glanced down at the goosebumps on my forearm, then back up. His tie was a shade darker. Still navy, but not quite the same navy. The pattern had changed, no longer diagonal stripes, but thin, barely visible dots running vertically. I slowed, my words hiccuping over themselves. I realized I was creating a bottleneck, I said. So I started. His eyebrows pinched together. It was the first genuine expression I'd seen on his face. Are you okay? He asked. Yeah, sorry. Just cold air. I tried to laugh it off. He glanced up at the vent, then down at his laptop. We can ask facilities to adjust it later. Don't worry. I wanted to say, your tie is different, wasn't it? 2 minutes ago. But that felt like the kind of thing that would derail an interview. So I nodded and kept talking. We moved into a technical question. Something about Bayesian updating in a dynamic environment. I loved this stuff. For a few minutes, my anxiety dissolved into the logic of priors and likelihoods, posterior distributions and convergence. I'm going to grab a whiteboard marker, Mark said. Why don't you walk me through your thought process? The whiteboard took up an entire wall behind me. I'd noticed it when I came in. I turned in my chair, uncapped the marker, and started writing out a simple model, my handwriting slanting slightly as I talked. It felt good. It felt like teaching, like office hours back in grad school. My hands remembered the dance. Write, speak, underline, turn back to gauge comprehension. I drew an arrow, capped the marker, placed it on the tray. Then I pivoted back in my chair. Mark's shirt had a faint blue checkered pattern now, not pure white. His jawline seemed sharper, almost as if he'd lost weight in the last 10 seconds. I froze. He noticed. Go on, he said, voice casual. You were talking about how you update when the data distribution shifts. His tone was steady, but there was something else in his eyes now. A kind of alertness, as if I were the one being watched through glass. I swallowed. Right. So, when the data distribution shifts, your prior assumptions may no longer be valid, which means I tried to focus on the math, on the structure of the answer, but my mind kept circling back around the loop of, his shirt is different. That shirt is different. You're not imagining that. Except, could I be? Stress can warp perception. I'd slept 5 hours, eaten nothing but half a protein bar and a cup of coffee. There are entire threads online about people misremembering details under pressure. Does that make sense? I asked, my explanation trailing off. It does, he said. Very much so. He smiled again. The symmetry of it felt perfect. Too perfect. Like it had been rendered, not grown. Let's do something a little different, Mark said. I want to talk less about what you know and more about who you are. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. The motion was smooth, unhurried. Okay, I said carefully. How do you respond, he asked, when reality doesn't match your expectations? I blinked. The question was broad, abstract, exactly the kind of thing an interviewer might ask at a company that prided itself on thinking different. But the way he said it, a fraction slower, each word weighted, made it feel like he was talking about something very specific. I glanced at the glass of water in front of me. I still hadn't touched it. My fingers left faint foggy prints on the side as I moved it. I tried to pause. Look at the evidence. Ask whether I'm projecting my assumptions onto what I see. He nodded twice. And if the evidence keeps contradicting you? Then I update my model, I said, almost automatically. Change what I believe. His eyes held mine. The air conditioner hummed quietly above us. Somewhere down the hallway, a phone rang, muffled. Good, he said. Good. He glanced at his laptop, as if checking some invisible checklist. When he looked back up, his eyes were green. They'd been brown. I was sure of it now. Daniel, he said. I realized I'd been staring. Sorry, I said. The word came out too fast, too high. Yeah. Updating my model. Evidence, right. He tilted his head, studying me. What do you think is happening right now? The question didn't fit. It wasn't an interview question. It wasn't on any behavioral list I'd rehearsed. It was the kind of thing a therapist might ask, gently. I'm in a job interview, I said slowly. He nodded, encouraging. Yes. And I'm nervous, I added, as if confessing something. Of course, he said. That's reasonable. His hair now hung a half-inch longer over his forehead. His nose was narrower. If he'd walked into the room looking like this, I might not have recognized him as the same man at all. My chest tightened. Daniel, he said, you're very good at noticing patterns. That's clear from your work history and your explanations. But there's something else I need to see. The corners of the room felt too far away, like the dimensions had subtly stretched without my consent. I glanced at the door. It was closed, the little vertical window set into it, showing only the blurred movement of people outside. See what? I asked. How you handle pattern breaks. The words were so calm, they barely registered as threatening, but every cell in my body seemed to lean away from him. I don't understand, I said. Yes, he replied, and something about the way he said it suggested that my not understanding was the point. He picked up his pen, twirled it between his fingers. As he did, his sleeve slid back slightly, revealing a wristwatch. Black band, plain face. That detail was new. You've had a rough 8 months, he said. Dozens of applications, several interviews, offers that almost came through, and then didn't. That must be exhausting. A small part of me wanted to ask how he knew that. Had he Googled me that thoroughly, scraped my LinkedIn, my GitHub, my blog posts where I'd hinted about the job hunt? But another part of me was stuck on the simple impossibility of his face. Can we? I began, then stopped, unsure how to phrase it without sounding insane. Did you change your tie? His expression didn't flicker. For a moment, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. Then, what do you remember? He asked softly. The stripes, I said. Before, now it's dots. He nodded, as if I'd answered a test correctly. And my hair? He asked. I stared at him. The room tilted infinitesimally. It was parted on the left, I said, when I came in. And now? The right, I whispered. He smiled, not the symmetrical stock photo smile, but something more subtle, less even, a human sort of smile. Good, he said. You're not ignoring it. Ignoring what? My brain wanted to scream. Instead, I asked, why? Because, he said, the role you're applying for requires a certain relationship with reality, with uncertainty. He tapped on his laptop. The screen brightened, casting a cool glow over his features. For a second, I saw my own reflection faintly in the glass. You're not the first candidate we've interviewed, Daniel, he said. Most people don't notice at all. Or they notice, and then they crush the thought before it can reach the surface. They choose comfort over coherence. He looked up at me again. His eyes darkened, shifting not just in color but in shape. Eyelids adjusting, lashes thickening. It was like watching a 3D model being edited in real time. "How are you doing?" he asked. I realized my hands were gripping the armrest so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I forced my fingers to unclench. "I don't know." "That's honest," he said approvingly. "Honesty is good." "Are you..." The question felt absurd as it formed. "Are you doing this on purpose?" "Yes," he said. I exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't meant to release. "How?" "That's not the interesting part," he replied. "The interesting part is you." Something in his posture shifted. Small, incremental changes to shoulders, neck, chin. He didn't blur or flicker. There was no cinematic effect. He simply became different, the way a person seems different under different lighting. Except the lighting hadn't changed. The face looking at me now reminded me of someone, but I couldn't place who. A composite of several people, maybe. A face that belonged on an ad for a bank. "Our work," he said, "involves building systems that make decisions about humans, hiring systems, evaluation systems, recommendation systems. We try to quantify the unquantifiable. You know this." I nodded slowly. My throat felt dry. "What we've learned," he continued, "is that the most dangerous failures aren't in the code. They're in the assumptions. The places where someone says, 'That's probably fine,' and never looks too closely at the cracks." He steepled his fingers. As he did, the skin on his hands darkened by half a shade, the knuckles becoming more pronounced. The watch face gleamed dully. "So we started wondering," he said, "what kind of person can look directly at a crack in reality and not flinch away?" He let the question hang in the air for a beat. "Most people," he said, "rationalize. They tell themselves they misremembered. They blame stress, or lighting, or fatigue. They recite little mantras. 'I'm just tired. It doesn't matter. I should focus on the task.' They perform rather than perceive." He tilted his head again, studying me. "You didn't." I wanted to protest. I wanted to say, "No, I did. I tried. I told myself I was anxious. I tried to ignore it. I wanted to keep this normal." But normal had already left the room. "What happens," he asked, "if you stand up and walk to the door?" The suggestion landed in my body before my mind. My knees tensed. My feet twitched. I glanced at the door again, 3 meters away, the vertical window showing the blurred hallway. "I leave," I said weakly. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe when you look through the glass, you see something you can't currently imagine." The way he said currently made my skin prickle. "You can try, if you'd like," he added. "There's no penalty for choosing not to continue." Not to continue what? I wanted to ask. The interview? The test? This experiment? Instead, I said, "What happens if I stay?" His lips curved just barely. "Then we see how far you're willing to go." Somewhere under the fear, under the rational part of me that whispered, "Get out, walk away," there was another voice, curious, hunger disguised as intellectual rigor. "What kind of company does this? What are they testing? What does it mean about the work?" In the worst months of my job search, I'd promised myself that I'd take any opportunity that wasn't exploitative, illegal, or morally bankrupt. I hadn't accounted for ontologically disorienting on that list. My father used to say that bravery wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do something anyway. That always sounded romantic in stories about firefighters and protesters and surgeons. It felt less glamorous in an office with fluorescent lights. I stood up. The room did not tilt or spin. The whiteboard remained where it was. The marker on the tray stayed still. Mark watched me with that same intent, unhurried gaze. His face, now almost but not quite familiar, in a way that unnerved me more than outright strangeness. I took a step toward the door, the carpet fibers pressed against the soles of my shoes. Another step. My hand reached toward the handle. The metal was cool, real. I looked through the vertical window. The hallway outside was the same beige corridor I'd walked down 20 minutes ago. Framed prints of abstract art, grey doors at intervals, a water cooler near the corner. A woman in a blazer walked past, scrolling on her phone. She did not have two heads or a distorted body or any obvious glitch in her movement. For a moment, relief surged so strongly it made me lightheaded. Maybe this is all psychological. Maybe it's some kind of immersive psych test. I could live with that. It was strange, ethically questionable, but comprehensible. Then the woman walking past froze mid-step, not stumbled, not stopped, froze. One foot hovered a centimeter above the floor, heel lifted. Her hair remained suspended in mid-swing. The little notification icon on her phone screen stopped halfway through its animation. The hum of the air conditioner cut off. The silence that followed wasn't normal silence. It was thick, like the world had been wrapped in cotton. Behind me, Mark's voice said, "What do you see?" I stared at the paused woman, at the stillness of the hallway. "She's stuck," I said. "Is she?" he asked. I watched, waiting for some sign of movement, a blink, a twitch, nothing. "Can I swallowed. "Can I open the door?" "Yes," he said, "if you'd like." My hand tightened on the handle. For a moment, I considered sitting back down, pretending I'd never come this far, insisting we return to normal interview questions. But there was no path back to ignorance. Once you see a magic trick from behind the stage, the illusion never regains its power. I pressed the handle down and pulled. The door opened soundlessly. The cold from the hallway was no different from the room's temperature, but my body shivered anyway. I stepped out. Up close, the woman's stillness was uncanny. A hair that should have fallen back toward her shoulder remained suspended. Her eyes were fixed on her phone screen, unblinking. A tiny icon, a loading spinner, had frozen mid-rotation. I raised my hand, hesitated, then waved it in front of her face. She didn't react. My heartbeat had moved from my chest to my ears. The world felt narrowed to a tunnel. Me, her, the silent corridor. Behind me, the voice came again, closer now. "How are you doing?" Mark asked. I turned. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. His face had changed again, more drastically this time. The grey hair was gone, replaced by dark curls. His skin was a warmer brown. His features had softened, eyes rounder. If I'd passed him on the street, I might have thought he was my cousin's friend from high school. "You're different," I said. The words sounded inadequate. "Am I?" he said. "Or are you just seeing more clearly?" I gestured weakly toward the frozen woman. "What is this?" He tilted his head, as if considering how much to reveal. "Tell me," he said, "what's the difference between a simulation and a model?" The question was so bizarrely academic I almost laughed. My mind grabbed at it like a lifeline. "A simulation is a kind of model," I said automatically, "but we generally say a simulation is something you can run forward in time to see how it behaves under certain conditions. And a model. A model is a representation, a way of capturing some aspect of reality in a structured form. Good, he said. Now, what happens when the model becomes more real to the system using it than the underlying reality it was built to represent? I stared at him. You get overfitting, bias, fragility. The system responds to its own abstraction instead of the messy, actual world. He smiled. Exactly. The woman in the hallway remained frozen, like a still frame waiting for a signal to resume. Are they real? I asked, voice small. The other people here? A shadow passed through his expression. Define real. I closed my eyes for a moment, pressing my fingers against the bridge of my nose. When I opened them, he was closer, about arm's length away. His face had shifted again, little by little, settling into features that made my stomach lurch with a sudden, uncanny recognition. It was my face. Not exactly, a version of it. Smoother maybe, less tired. The faint crease between the eyebrows was gone. The scar on my chin from a childhood bike accident was missing. But the eyes, the nose, the mouth, those were mine. Every time I looked away, the interviewer looked different. Every time I looked back, he looked more like me. Why are you applying for the job you already have? He asked. The hallways seemed to pull back, like a camera dolling slowly away. My legs felt hollow. What? I whispered. This, he said, gesturing vaguely around us, is your work, Daniel. Has been for some time. You build models of human judgment. You've done it willingly, skillfully, even passionately. You wrote that paper in grad school about recursive evaluation loops, systems that measure people, until the original human signal is almost lost. My thoughts flickered to the thesis I'd written, the one hardly anyone had read. I hadn't mentioned it in this interview. You said, he continued, that the only way to keep such a system grounded was to periodically reinsert a human in the loop to evaluate the evaluator. To ask, does this still make sense? He, the other me, raised an eyebrow. What do you think you're doing right now? I looked past him, into the office, the whiteboard with my equations, the glass of water I hadn't touched, the laptop with my resume. It's a test, I said slowly. Yes. Of what? My sanity? I shook his head. Of your willingness to see what's in front of you, even when it contradicts what you want to be true. I glanced at the frozen woman again. And them. Samples, he said. Scenarios. You're good at constructing them, running them, tweaking parameters. He took a step closer. I flinched, not because he looked threatening, but because seeing my own face make expressions I wasn't controlling felt fundamentally wrong. At some level, he said, you know you've been here before. Not this exact configuration, but close. The details shift. The decor changes. Sometimes I keep the same face longer. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes the anomalies appear in the room. Sometimes outside. We're probing the boundaries of your model. My voice cracked. I don't remember that. Of course not, he said gently. We reset between runs. Otherwise, the contamination would spread. The carpet felt unsteady under my feet. Reset what? You, he said simply. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than the frozen hallway. This one was internal, a vacuum around the word. That doesn't make sense, I said. That's one model, he replied. Another is that it makes sense, but the part of you that knows how to deny uncomfortable conclusions is very, very skilled. My mind searched frantically for some anchor. I thought of the apartment I'd left that morning, the unwashed dishes, the pile of laundry on the chair, the text from my mother wishing me good luck. I thought of my phone in my pocket. My phone. I fumbled for it, pulling it out. The screen lit up, 10:42 a.m. The home screen showed the photo I'd taken last summer at the lake. I swiped up. No notifications. I opened messages. The threads were there. Mom, Dad, my friend Kev, the recruiter who'd set up this interview. I tapped on my mom's name. The last message, love you. You've got this. Call me after. I started typing. Hey Mom, something weird is happening. The letters appeared one by one, then stopped. Not because I stopped typing, because the screen stopped responding. The blinking cursor froze between the G and the W. I pressed the home button. Nothing. Side button. Nothing. The device, Mark said softly, is part of the scenario, like the hallway, like the woman, like me. I wanted to throw the phone at him to see if it passed through, if it hit, if it shattered. Instead, my hand stayed motionless at my side, fingers locked around the smooth rectangle. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because you asked us to, he said. He walked past me toward the frozen woman. As he did, his back, the slope of his shoulders, the way his jacket hung, shifted subtly, aligning more and more with my own posture. You wanted to know, he continued, if it was possible to build a system that could evaluate itself, truly, without human oversight. You argued that the only way was to embed a human-like model inside it, a model that could experience confusion, doubt, dissonance, that could notice when something felt wrong, even before it could articulate why. It turned back to me. It was like looking into a time-delayed mirror. So, he said, we built one. With your help. My throat tightened. I don't remember. You remember enough, he said. You remember interviews, questions, the feeling of being evaluated. That's the scaffold we used. Familiar enough not to trigger outright rejection. Strange enough to push against the edges of your certainty. I thought of all the nights I'd lain awake, replaying interviews in my head, wondering what I could have said differently. I'd always assumed that was just anxiety. It never occurred to me that I might be rehearsing an experiment I'd designed. What happens if I refuse? I asked. If I say no, if I walk out, if I decide this is all a hallucination and I don't care. He, my reflection, smiled, and in that smile, I saw both approval and something like sorrow. Then, he said, we learned something about the limits of this model, about how far it's willing to go before self-preservation overrides curiosity. That's useful data. And if I continue, I asked. He spread his hand slightly. Then maybe, in the next run, we give you a little more, a bit more continuity, a bit more memory. See what you do with it. See if you can hold both things at once, that your experiences are constructed and that they still matter. The notion landed somewhere deep in me, a seed in soil I hadn't known was there. This is the work, he said softly. You're very good at it, but you keep forgetting that you're already doing it. You keep applying for a job you already have. I looked around, the paused hallway, the frozen woman, the office door, the interview room with my equations on the whiteboard, the phone in my hand, stuck mid-sentence. A thought surfaced, quiet and clear. If this is a test of a system's ability to recognize its own constraints, then the only failure would be to pretend those constraints don't exist. I took a breath. Okay, I said. Okay, what? He asked. Okay, I accept that this is a model, I said. A scenario that I'm part of it, whatever that means. He nodded once. But, I added, surprising myself, I also think the way I respond still matters, even if you reset me, even if you tweak things, because patterns leave traces, right? In weights and biases, in code paths. Even in erased chalk, there are grooves in the board. His eyes, my eyes, widened just a fraction. That's an interesting hypothesis, he said. We stood there, facing each other, separated by a few feet, and a gulf I couldn't begin to measure. After a moment, he stepped back toward the office. Shall we finish the interview? He asked. There are a few more questions. I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Will I remember? Not consciously, he said. But maybe, next time, you'll notice the changes sooner. He walked into the room. As he did, his features began to shift again, smoothing out into the original anonymous face. Grey suit, navy tie, hair parted neatly on the left. By the time he sat down, he was Mark again. The air conditioner hummed back to life. The woman in the hallway took her next step as if nothing had interrupted it. The phone in my hand resumed. The cursor blinked. The letters appeared. Hey Mum, something weird is happening. I stared at the text. Then slowly, I hit backspace. The words disappeared. I typed instead, interview going. Will call after. I hit send. I walked back into the room. Mark smiled politely, like any interviewer at any company in any office. So, he said, glancing at his laptop, one last question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I considered all the usual answers, leading a team, driving impact, growing within the organization. Instead, I said, still asking questions I don't know how to answer yet. He nodded, brows lifting slightly. That, he said, sounds about right. He clicked something on his laptop. The screen dimmed. Thank you, Daniel, he said. We'll be in touch.